Hi, my name is Anna, and I'm going to be doing chapter 3, which is titled Psychological Theories on Personality. So, the chapter starts out with the three psychological models of a person and theoretical variations. A comprehensive theory must address these questions. So, the first one is, what is a personality made of? The second one is, how does the personality work or function? And the third is, how and why does the personality change? The three frameworks that are in this chapter are the psychoanalytical, the behavioral, and the phenomenological. So the psychoanalytical is the homo volens, which is the rational person who strives to reduce inner tensions and conflicts accumulated from his or her past, which is largely unconscious. The second, which is behavioral, is homo mechanicus, and it's the rational reactive person whose behavior is determined by the consequences of his or her responses to the immediate environment. And the third is the phenomenological, which is the homo creator, and it's the creative thinking person who has free will to choose alternatives to create meaning in life and to fulfill his or her own potentialities. So the psychoanalytic theory has eros, which includes the Oedipus and the Electra complex, the unconscious motivation, which is like the slip of a pen or a tongue, and then the defense mechanism, which includes displacement. The first one from Freud. So Freud's basic assumptions about human nature. There are two innate drives. There's eros and there's thanatos. Eros is the urge to live, and thanatos is the urge to die. Freud says that we are not always aware of why we do what we do, which is called the unconscious motivation. So the conscious is divided into three. It's the conscious, the pre-conscious, and the unconscious. The pre-conscious is in the middle of the conscious and the unconscious. It's a certain part of the unconscious that can be easily made conscious, and it's kind of like memory tracing. And then the unconscious is the prime source of personality, but it's mostly inaccessible to our awareness without special efforts. The structure of the personality in psychoanalysis follows with the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the it. So it's the seedbed of our basic instincts that generate the psychic energy, which are excitations. You're born with it, but it's not accessible at all. And it transforms the bodily need, so the hunger, thirst, sex, into psychological tensions. The ego, which is the I, is not present at birth, but it evolves out of the id in early infancy. So it dwells on all three levels of the consciousness. So it's in the consciousness, the pre-consciousness, and and the unconsciousness. It is capable of distinguishing what is real and unreal, and it's the moderator between the id and the external world. And then the superego, which is the above I, evolves out of the ego in the early age. It has no direct contact with the external reality, and it makes unrealistic demands. And even though it has no access to the outside, like the external reality, it still strives relentlessly for moral perfection. Now, the dynamics of personality are there are a few. So there's the anxiety, which is the expression of a retreat from danger, but it's only felt by the ego when it cannot satisfy the three master anxieties. So the three master anxieties would be reality, which is the danger in the external environment, and then there's neurotic, which is the danger that the id impulses, and then the moral, which is the conflict with the superego. There are defense mechanisms, which are unconscious mental strategies used by the ego in an effort to reduce anxiety. These defend the ego from impending dangers, at least temporarily. So the book lists them. There's repression, denial, reaction, formation, projection, displacement, rationalization, fixation, regression, and sublimation. That's a lot. So, repression is the generic form of the ego defense, and it's a mental process that forces anxiety provoking impulses, ideas, feelings, and events away from the consciousness. So, it's kind of like locking them away. Denial is just the resistance to accept the painful reality. Reaction formation is the inversion process, so it's transforming the original impulses or feelings to exactly the opposite or inverting them. Projection is shifting the burden, so it's projecting it onto something else. Displacement is repressed impulses are shifted from their true object and expressed toward a less threatening, innocent target. So it's kind of like if you're angry at one person, but you take it out on someone who is kind of like them or whatever, but not really. It's the more innocent target. Rationalization is the process of finding acceptable reasons or excuses for unacceptable thoughts or actions. Fixation is the permanent attachment of libido to a certain stage of psychosexual development. Regression is reverting to an earlier stage of development. And sublimation is the process of rechanneling the misdirected psychic energy to socioculturally valued aims. So according to Freud, these are the psychosexual development stages. So there's the oral stage, the anal stage, the phallic stage, the latency stage, and the genital stage. So the oral stage is the first 12 to 18 months of life, and it's kind of like when a baby wants to put everything in its mouth. The pleasure senses are centered around the mouth, the lips, the gums, and the tongue, and so they're constantly sucking or biting on things. The anal stage, according to Freud, is from ages 1 to 1.5 years. So this is the erotic gratification by defecation and urination. The phallic stage is the third year of life to about 5 or 6 years old. The genital area becomes the main erogenous zone for both sexes, but this is just because they're just now discovering it. The male child develops sexual attraction towards his mother and wishes to displace his father, which is the Oedipus complex. Now, there's a female Oedipus complex, but it's a little bit more complicated. It's basically that the female child is upset or angry with the mother because she was brought into the world without a penis and she wants to share her father's penis. The latency stage is from 5 to 6 years old to about puberty, so around 12 years old. That's when the sexual development becomes latent due to like the parent suppression or the internalized guilt or shame or morality of the child. And then you reach the genital stage, which begins at age 12, and it's the adolescent's libido is now usually cathected in a person of the opposite sex towards genital union. Now we have the psychopathology and therapy. This concerns the ego's conflict with its three masters, the id, the external reality, and the superego. In a healthy person, the ego is both strong and flexible enough, but in some people it's not. So the main goal of psychoanalytical therapy is to help the patient recall, uncover, and reintegrate unconscious or repressed materials and deal with them consciously. Now, moving on to behaviorism, it's the modification of behavior. Skinner is the main person here. So Skinner's Science of Human Behavior states that behavior is what an organism is doing, observed by the observer. Behavior is determined, lawful, and hence can be predicted and controlled. occurrence, change, and elimination of behavior are determined by external conditions rather than internal forces, and human beings are subject to the same principles of conditioning as animals. Therefore, when you're testing on animals, you can kind of use that same data on humans. And there is no enduring structure of personality or self, so it's always changing, it's always different, it's not the same. There's respondent and operant behavior. So respondent is either an unconditioned or unlearned, or a conditioned or learned response elicited by a specific stimulus. For example, eye blinking due to direct light. And then you have the operant, which is behavior which operates upon the environment to generate consequences. The shaping of behavior. So shaping is defined as a procedure of fine-tuning behavior by rewarding successive approximations to the desired goal. Now, there are different schedules of reinforcement. So there's continuous reinforcement, and then there's intermittent reinforcement. And with intermittent, there are four different types of intermittent reinforcement. So there's fixed interval reinforcement, which is an organism is being reinforced for its correct response at specifically fixed intervals, so kind of like every 4 hours or every 3 hours. And then you have the variable interval reinforcement schedule, which is that the organism is reinforced for its correct response at specific but random intervals. So it could be like this one time it'll be 4 minutes, and then 5 minutes, and then 3 minutes. And then the fixed ratio reinforcement schedule, the organism is reinforced for performing a specific fixed number of responses. So it'll be like every fourth occurrence, then that's when they'll get the reward. Or it could be variable ratio reinforcement schedule, which is that the organism is reinforced for performing a specific but random number of responses. So it'll be every second, and then every fifth, and then every third occurrence. The maladjusted behavior and modification, the goal for this is to eliminate or modify the overt behaviors which appear to be dangerous to the individual and or to others. Alternatives to radical behaviorism or social learning theories. So there are two major perspectives. There's an adherence to the traditional views of behaviorism, that human behavior is acquired through the principles of learning rather than caused by unconscious motives or underlying dispositions. And then a significant departure from the radical behaviorisms is that human responses to reinforcement are not automatic, but depend on the individual's subjective interpretation, expectation, and evaluation. There's observational learning, which is modeling, which is learning through observation of others in a particular situation without experiencing direct reinforcement. Walter Mischel's 5 major cognitive variables are competencies, so it's what can you do. There's encoding strategies, so that's how you see it. Expectancies, which are what will happen. Subjective values, which is what is it worth. And then you have self-regulatory systems and plans, which is how can you achieve it. The phenomenological theory. So what is phenomenology? It encompasses various humanistic and existential theories on personality. The phenomenological reduction is an act of eliminating or suspending all assumptions and beliefs that influence our perception and cognition so that we can understand the true essence of human consciousness. The phenomenological perspectives are the person's free choice, which is selectivity, so we can choose what we see, think, and do. Subjective meaning and experiences as one's reality, which is we can reject and change our environment or even create a new one. And then there's the holistic view, which is the gestalt of personality on the process of becoming, self-actualization, which is that personality is therefore not merely determined by the instinctual needs or environmental stimuli, but a formative process of becoming a whole person. The person-centered theory of Carl Rogers is that all organisms have an inherent tendency to maintain and enhance their quality of life to the fullest, and every organism has innate force to grow and actualize its constructive potentials. Then the core constructs of personality would be the basic source of personality is the phenomenal field, which is the inner subjective world experienced by the organism. The self or self-concept is the most essential construct of personality, and that's the organized, consistent, conceptual gestalt composed of perceptions of the characteristic of the I or me, and the perception of the reality of the I or me to others in the various aspects of life, together with the values attached to these perceptions. The personality development. So there are no specific developmental phases or stages are theorized. It's simply put emphasis on the internal force of personality growth, the direction of maturation, and the conditions influencing the maturation process. The person-centered psychopathology and therapy. So the primary task is to help the client give up the defenses, so the defenses would be denial and distortion of experiences, so that he or she can change and reorganize the self-concept to be consistent with true organismic experiences. Maslow's hierarchy of human needs is based on the assumption that human beings are motivated by 5 universal basic needs that can be satisfied in a hierarchical order in terms of priority or relative potency of the needs. So you have the physiological, which is kind of the essentials like the food, water, oxygen, etc. Then you have safety, so that's security, stability, dependency, freedom of fear, anxiety, and chaos, need for structure, order, laws, limits, strength in the protector, etc. Then you have belongingness and love, so that's intimate feelings of tenderness, affection, caring, and sharing ecstasy and responsibility with close persons. You have esteem, which has 2 parts. So the first is the desire for strength, achievement, adequacy, mastery, and competency, confidence, independence, and freedom. And then you have the desire for reputation or prestige, status, dominance, recognition, attention, importance, or appreciation. And lastly, on that bottom, so it starts with the most important, or the most, I guess, in that hierarchical order of it. The last one is self-actualization. So that's the desire for self-fulfillment, or to the tendency for the person to become actualized in what he or she is potentially. So the qualifications for Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Although basic needs are biologically based, they are growth fostering forces that can be stifled by growth discouraging forces such as regression, fear, pain of growth, ignorance, etc. The hierarchy of needs should not be understood as a fixed order, and basic needs are largely unconscious in the average person. So what they said was that someone has to be like a super person, or like a better person, more than average, to be able to put those basic needs into the conscious instead of the unconscious. Now, the criticisms for the Rogers Maslow theories are that it's too optimistic, and it's a simplified view of human nature. Then they have how do you study subjective experiences objectively, and the last one is the empirical validity of theoretical constructs. And with that, that concludes chapter 3. I hope you guys learned something. If not, then go read the chapter.